Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to my Spec Spotlight for the Vengeance Demon Hunter. This is a series where we take a look at all the specs in the game and talk about what to expect when you're playing with or as them in Mythic+. Let's talk about incoming damage for Vengeance Demon Hunters. So the community perception for this spec is that they take a lot of incoming damage, and this is somewhat true, it's not entirely unfounded, but they've been buffed in this department a couple times since the start of BFA, and nowadays it's generally true that while a Vengeance Demon Hunter has their Demon Spikes active, or their Metamorphosis active, they're pretty unlikely to die. Their tankiness, both inside and outside of those windows, has been buffed, but Demon Spikes is their active mitigation. You can tell when they have this up because they'll have spikes coming out of the back of their character model, so you can actually see when your tank has this ready and when they don't. And during that time, they're pretty unlikely to die to physical damage. They got a lot of armor and parry while they're in that. Or when they're in their big demon meta form, which is once every 3 minutes they can do that, they are also unlikely to die. That also gives them just a bunch of health and stuff. So in either of those windows, they are pretty tanky. Outside of those, they are still pretty squishy. They're still fairly squishy with neither of those things up, and they're in danger of dying in higher keys to unmitigated autos while they don't have Demon Spikes or Meta active. They can just get taken from 100 to 0 very quickly outside of that range. So it's important for a good Demon Hunter to kite, and this is part of the reason that when we get to the builds later in this video, the one that I'll be proposing as the best one tends to be built around maximizing Metamorphosis and Demon Spike's uptime. Mythic Plus is mostly physical damage, but there is still some magic damage scattered throughout there, and Vengeance Demon Hunters are one of the best tanks against magic damage. First of all, they do a lot of self-healing, and self-healing based tankiness is generally better than, you know, blocking-based tankiness against magic damage, because it's still fairly effective at recuperating damage done by magic. Demon Hunters also have tattoos, which give them reduced magic damage, just a baseline DR on incoming magic, which is really nice. And their meta gives them a nice big health pool that is really useful. While they're in meta, they're fairly tanky also against magic damage. So it's a pretty good spec for taking heavy magic damage in Mythic Plus. Fights like Shadow of Zul, for instance. If you see a Vengeance Demon Hunter fighting that, I've seen clips where they get up to hundreds of thousands of HPS even. You know, in a very high key setting, one-off situation maybe, but still, that's the kind of fight that I'd say Vengeance Demon Hunter is fairly good at compared to the other specs. Now, many tanks have a shield wall ability. Vengeance Demon Hunters is a little bit weird. It's on a fairly short cooldown, but it only targets one target, so they can shield wall 40% of incoming damage, but only against one target. So that's a useful ability on, you know, single target incoming damage, but if 5 mobs are hitting them very hard, it's not a button that will save them very much. All right, let's talk about the utility the Vengeance Demon Hunter brings. The biggest piece of utility, I'd say, is Imprison. Imprison, as we talked about in the Havoc Demon Hunter show, if you haven't watched that, is also shared with that spec, but it is a uniquely powerful crowd control ability, because Imprison and Sap are the only two abilities in the game where you can use it on a target and walk next to it and not get in combat. And in Mythic Plus, this is awesome. There are a lot of spots where, you know, if you have a Demon Hunter and a Rogue, you can, like, Sap Imprison 2 mobs that are standing in your way, run by them, and never have to worry about fighting them later. Whereas if you don't have access to that, you're gonna have to, like, you know, even if you hit them with a Polymorph or whatever, when that Polymorph breaks, they'll then run at you and be in combat. So Imprison, extremely useful there. Also useful mid-fight, various cases, you know, if it is a way to stop a mob from casting in a pinch, but mostly useful for that out-of-combat crowd control element. Vengeance Demon Hunters also can place sigils on the ground that have different effects. In addition to one that just does damage, they have Sigil of Chains, which is on a fairly long cooldown, but it is a mass grip sigil, so they can place that down and mass grip mobs to it. It's a fairly short-range mass grip, right? The things have to be in range of the sigil, so it's not as good as, you know, Gorfien's Grasp necessarily, but it's pretty useful. They can use it as a kite tool. They can place it, you know, and then run the opposite direction, and the Sigil Chains can pull the mobs back to it. And they can use it to interrupt things and group things up to be hit by other AoE crowd control effects. So very useful sigil there. They also have Sigil of Silence, which is an AoE silence, an 8-second AoE silence that also interrupts single target spellcasting. Extremely potent ability here. This can be great. Like, you know, you group up a bunch of attendants in Shrine of the Storm and other tanks would be dying to getting water blasted or whatever. This is, like, more powerful than Solar Beam is against that. And Solar Beam is extremely good there, so extremely strong sigil against like groups of spellcasters. And then the final utility sigil they have is Sigil of Misery, which is a 20-second incapacitate that's broken on damage. This is really useful in various places. You can use it while you're trying to group mobs up, you know, just tell everybody to not do damage and, you know, Sigil of Misery something. You can also use it in, like, Siege of Borealis. You can Sigil of Misery things and have nobody else do damage to them, and then you can kill them with the Ashvane Spotter circles. And that won't break Sigil of Misery, so That's a pretty cool way to use that there, but an extremely potent tool, either as an AoE stop, like in the middle of combat, you can use it to stop a bunch of casts on a bunch of mobs, even ones that aren't, interruptible through interrupts, or to use it as, temporary crowd control while you're setting things up. Vengeance Demon Hunters also have a cheat death in the form of Last Resort. They don't always talent this, but often they do. There are other viable options on that road that you may run into Demon Hunters playing, but typically it's Last Resort because you know how we talked about how the spec sometimes just kind of falls over dead outside of Demon Spikes and meta? With Last Resort available, that means that the next time they die, instead they will turn into a meta demon, and that's really useful. They'll basically not be in danger of dying. It's only once every 8 minutes, but it's still extremely strong, and it changes how you feel about a pull. If your Demon Hunter has Last Resort available, you can pull a little bit less carefully, a little bit less scared, and you can be a little bit less worried about them, maybe having a little bit of a downtime in their mitigation and just falling over dead. They can kite a little bit less aggressively, whereas when their Last Resort is unavailable, then they're going to be kiting a lot more often in big pulls. As the other members of the group, you can check to see if your Vengeance Demon Hunter, first of all, you can check to see if they're talented it, and then second of all, you can see if it's available. It'll be a debuff on them if they have Last Resorted recently, and then you'll know that they don't have access to it again. They also have an offensive purge, which is nice in various dungeons where mobs need to be purged. And they have quite a bit of mobility. So they have a Abyssal Strike, which is like a heroic leap thing that they can do all the time. And they have double jump and glide, which means that they're fairly mobile, getting from point A to point B. Vengeance Demon Hunter is one of the best tanks for doing that. And glide does let you do a little Shadow of Zool exploity skip thing that I made a video on a couple weeks ago. I'll put a little link to it here as well, that Vengeance Demon Hunters can also do. Unclear when or if that's going to be fixed, but as of right now, this is a spec that does let you skip that mob. And finally, they bring a serious amount of group-wide magic damage, depending on your composition. 5% increased magic damage to everything they touch with Chaos Brand. This can be really good if you're playing with stuff like, Assassination Rogue, Fire Mage. Those specs benefit a lot from a Chaos Brand, so having a Vengeance Demon Hunter bringing that. Often there's a Havoc Demon Hunter in groups, but if you're not playing with a Havoc Demon Hunter, if you want your DH to be Vengeance instead, that's an equally good way to get access to Chaos Brand. All right, let's talk about the builds of Vengeance Demon Hunter. The main thing that you'll want to look for to see what kind of Vengeance Demon Hunter you're playing with is actually a talent on their level 90 talent row, whether or not they've taken Spirit Bomb or Gluttony. If they're taking Gluttony, that's the build that tends to be taken in high keys these days, and that's the build that gives them meta procs all the time. So if they're taking that, then that's the tankier build that I endorse. Or they may take Spirit Bomb, which is common in lower keys and is a higher damage spec. For now, for the rest of this video, I'm going to talk mostly about what you'll see if people are playing Gluttony, but it is worth being aware that Spirit Bomb is an option too, and that is, they're a little bit more in danger if they're taking high incoming damage, but it does a lot more damage than the Gluttony build does. So as far as essences go, the major essences you'll usually see are either Vision of Perfection or Anima of Life and Death. Vision of Perfection is another meta proccing tool, whereas Anima of Life and Death can be useful to gain threat immediately in pulls. It's a good combo with the extra health from Metamorphosis, so a Gluttony procced Metamorphosis or a real Metamorphosis that they press themselves gives them a lot more max health, and that translates to more damage with the active on Anima. So those are the two main majors that you'll see. As far as minors go, there are a lot of good tank ones for different situations. Conflict and Strife is kind of a all-around good option. That one will give them a bunch of versatility stacks. It's also worth noting that this is good as a major in the Motherload for the third boss, Rixa Flux Flame. Conflict and Strife Major actually gives you a PvP talent that lets you dispel yourself every time you get chemical burned. So in a high key, you may actually have your Vengeance Demon Hunter switch out to that major. They can do it like after you kill the second boss in Motherload, you can hearth out and run back in and switch your essences. And that can be a really useful thing if you're having trouble with that third boss. Other minors you'll see Vengeance Demon Hunters using. Null Barrier, just good against magic damage generally. Anytime there's a magic damage affix or just a dungeon that has quite a bit of magic damage, Null Barrier is likely to get a lot of value. Sphere Suppression, good especially on necrotic weeks, ways to lower the attack speed of things that are attacking you. And it's something that can be considered as a major under those circumstances. But it's also always a fine option as a minor, especially if you feel like you may need to kite in whatever dungeon you're doing. And finally, Aegis is just an all-around good one, especially for fortified weeks, dungeons with a lot of trash. and places where you're not worried about dying so much on single target, because on single target, it doesn't have all that much utility. Vengeance Demon Hunter traits are a little bit weird. The most impactful trait, I'd say, is actually an inner ring trait. Getting 3 of the Soulmonger trait will be a pretty serious HPS increase to them. It gives them a big absorb shield every time they absorb a soul fragment, which happens all the time. So that'll be a pretty substantial part of their healing. And there's not really anything super important on the outer rings for them. They kind of just want one-ofs of a bunch of different traits that improve their rotation. So there's ones that improve, Immolation Aura and their sigils and stuff. So one of a bunch of these different traits is good. But 3 Soulmonger is actually a really powerful thing for them to go for. So that sort of build is often what you'll see if they have access to all the Azerite that they want. This tier, trinkets for tanks, generally follow about the same lines for every spec. The default tends to be the Bloodthirsty Urchin from Lady Ashvane and the Edicts of the Faithless from the Queen's Court. And that's true for Vengeance Demon Hunters as well if they want to be tanky. Those are 2 excellent options, very easy to get at high item level because they're from the raid, so you can do them at a difficult, you can do them on Heroic or Mythic and get them at fairly high level compared to Mythic Plus trinkets that are a lot harder to get high level versions of. But if your tank isn't interested in going full defensive, if they want to play something that's a little bit more mid-rangey or even aggressive, they might play something like Harlan's Loaded Dice. That's a stat proc that gives them both offensive and defensive utility. Or they may play something full aggressive, something like Cyclotronic Blast, Ashvane's Razor, Coral, Dribbling Ink Pod. Those sorts of effects can be a way for them to try and increase their damage. Because the rest of their build, with Gluttony, Vision of Perfection, those tend to be things that are pretty defensive focused, rather than more offensive talents and essences that they could be running, because they need to play those defensive essences and talents to survive. But they may be able to squeeze in offensive trinkets at least to try and make up some of the difference. All right, let's talk about the kind of groups that work well with Demon Hunters. Magic damage is obviously a synergy for them, so things like Fire Mage, again, Assassination Rogue, Elemental Shaman, obviously all the casters, healers that do a lot of magic damage, so Holy Pallies, that kind of stuff. Really good synergy with the Chaos Brand ability that they're bringing. On the topic of high damage healers, I'd say that's a really useful thing to bring with a tank. So things like Disc Priests and Holy Pallies kind of help to make up for the low damage of a, defensively built Vengeance Demon Hunter. And Disc Priest and Holy Pally have damage reduction cooldowns that they can give their tank. So things like Pain Suppression. You know how we were talking about how Vengeance Demon Hunter has this problem of falling over dead sometimes when they're outside of their defensive windows? Well, Pain Suppression is a really good answer for that, right? So Vengeance Demon Hunter is just the spec that doesn't require all that much healing generally, but at times requires, a big DR to just be able to survive and not get one shot. And Disc Priest really complements that side of their kit. So I think that's actually a pretty cool synergy, and some of the top runs of Vengeance Demon Hunter have been done with Disc Priest. Actually, all sorts of different healers have worked well with them. Again, I'd say Holy Pally, Mistweaver, and obviously, of course, still great with Resto Druid, but I'd say that this is a tank that there's some useful synergies between the kits of this and some of the less played healers. One week where you may have trouble as a Vengeance Demon Hunter is Skittish Week. You may have to actually adjust your build to be more offensive to make up for the fact that you're not generating that much threat because you're not doing that much damage. So things like Anima Major instead of Vision of Perfection, and maybe even going Spirit Bomb instead of Gluttony are things that you may see Vengeance Demon Hunters doing that week. Although, you're still dying to mobs in high keys under those circumstances, so it's a really tough line to walk, because if you're forced to kite earlier, then that's also going to be bad for Skittish, and people will start ripping threat at that time. Really, the best thing to be doing is just bringing multiple rogues or hunters who have misdirection and tricks of the trade to help make up for it. But it is a challenging week for the spec. Thanks for watching my Vengeance Demon Hunter spec spotlight. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything about the spec or if you disagree on any of my assessments of it. I'll continue doing this series. I'm going to try and do 2 of these episodes per week until I get through all the specs. So let me know which ones you'd like to see next. And remember to like and subscribe and turn on notifications. And check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Ratnos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.